Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this ICANN81 readout webinar. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of land throughout Australia. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also pay my respects to the traditional owners of land wherever you're joining us from in Australia, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us on this call. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were the first people to innovate and use technology on this land, and they've continued to do so over many millennia. I just wanted to acknowledge that point as we begin our discussion about ICANN. Very often we sort of tend to think of innovation and technology as new, but First Nations people have been doing it here in Australia for thousands of years. We are joined today by some guests who are going to share their perspectives on the ICANN 81st public meeting, which was held as an annual general meeting from 9th to the 14th of October in beautiful Istanbul. Each of our speakers will be giving an update, and once we've heard the updates, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions using the Q&A pod. So let me just introduce our speakers. We have Ian Sheldon, who's Australia's GAC representative. He's at ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee, and he's just been elected one of the GAC's 5 vice chairs. And since I doubt he will tell you this, I will. He secured more votes than any other candidate, so congratulations, Ian. Also joining us, we have Ram Mohan, Chief Strategy Officer at Identity Digital and Chair of ICANN's Security and Stability Advisory Committee. Ashley Heineman, Director of Global Policy at GoDaddy, and Ashley recently entered her term as Chair of the GNSO's Registrar Stakeholder Group. And also joining us is Justine Chu, who's a lawyer in Kuala Lumpur with a specific interest in the internet and global domain name policy making, and she's the chair of ICANN's At-Large Advisory Committee. I might start with you, Justine, because I know you have other commitments this morning as well. Thank you for joining us and looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Mute. Okay, so to find the unmute button. My name is Justine. Thank you to Alda for the invitation. I hope I can be heard. I don't have the correct screen on, but it doesn't matter. I don't really want to waste too much time fiddling with stuff. So again, my name is Justine Chu. I am actually the ALAC Vice Chair, the At-Large Advisory Committee Vice Chair, not the Chair. But I also hold a number of other positions, including ALAC member, as well as the ALAC liaison to the GNSO. So I'm just going to talk you through a little bit of what ALAC is, at-large is, and what are our key issues that we discuss in ICANN 81. Right? So I understood from Annalise that the participants here may or may not have some knowledge on ICANN. So I'm just going to take you guys through some high-level stuff, okay? So within the ICANN community itself, there are a number of structures, committees, what we call, supporting name organizations, or supporting organizations or advisory committees. And this is just an illustration of where those committees stand or sit and what they are. Okay, I come from the at-large community, which is there, right? And yeah, sorry about that. So the at-large community is actually made up of end users basically, and in terms of structure-wise, we are organized through entities, is what we call at-large structures, and also individual members. So that constitutes our membership. And these members are organized within 5 regions, as you see on the screen. And from each of the regions, 3 are selected to form what is called the At-Large Advisory Committee. Okay, and that is a 15 people executive committee, if you want, just to make it easier. Right. The ICANN bylaws actually provide for ALAC, which is the At-Large Advisory Committee, to be the primary organizational home within the ICANN for individual and internet users. So everything that we do in terms of our mandate has got to do with individual internet users. I'm not going to read through all this, but suffice to say that sometimes, and in many cases, individual internet users' interests also overlap with those of domain name registrants. Okay. So out of all this, the takeaway is that the ALAC, the At-Large Advisory Committee, has a duty to understand, represent, and advocate for the best interests of individual internet users worldwide. Right. Now, some of the key issues that we had been discussing and may probably take forward going into ICANN 82 is the new generic top-level domain name program, or the new GTLD, or better known as the next round. So we all eyes are on ICANN now because the next round is due to launch in 2026, Q2, I believe it is. And in fact, one of the ancillary programs for the next round, which is the applicant support program, it has already been launched. It was launched on the 19th of November. So these are a number of the programs that ICANN runs that the At-Large and the ALAC have got their eyes on. We're monitoring closely because we are advocating for, introducing new players into the domain name space. So hopefully getting more registry operators coming in from the global south and underserved regions, right? We are also particularly keen on making sure that Latin script diacritics are, the policy for allowing that to take place as soon as possible. And Latin diacritics means that, those symbols above certain alphabets in French or Spanish, which currently are not allowed for as a variant of a TLD. We are also concerned about the domain name transfers policy in terms of, say, for example, allowing registrants to participate in the dispute resolution process that is designated for transfers, domain name transfers. And the evergreen topic that the At-Large Committee and ALAC have always had their eye on is DNS abuse. Now, within ICANN itself, DNS abuse has a very specific definition. In particularly, we are focusing on phishing because phishing is continue to be increasing globally. So one of the things that ICANN has done is commission a study called the Informal Report. That recently came out. So the At-Large Committee will be looking to examine this report to see what we can do about making sure phishing is addressed properly, or the incidence of it is coming down. And that's got to do with things like price point for domain name registration, as well as bulk registration, the ability to do bulk registration. And we're just trying to see if we can introduce some friction between domain name registration in bulk, as well as things like, know your clients insofar as registrars are concerned, to be some kind of a standard benchmark policy. So I'll stop there and, move on to other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Justine. We'll move now to Ian, the representative from the Government Advisory Committee. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks, Annalise. So my name is Ian Sheldon. I'm the Director of the Internet Governance team here in the Department of Infrastructure. As Annalise mentioned, I'm also Australia's GAC representative. Thanks again to ADA for hosting this webinar and giving me the opportunity to provide this brief readout for those who might have been able to make it to the meeting. I'll try and provide a little bit of light and colour, but we'll rely mostly on the communique for providing more of the specifics as to what the GAC might have thought about specific issues. So the Istanbul meeting was quite a good one for the GAC. Nothing particularly controversial. The schedule is always quite busy, and this one was no exception. I think the one of the biggest aspects of this meeting was the large number of bilaterals that the GAC had. Probably the largest number of meetings with other parts of the ICANN community for quite some time. We met with almost every other part of the ICANN community, the at-large advisory committee, the generic name supporting organization, the contractor parties house of the generic name supporting organization, the country code name supporting organization, as well as a breadth of others. The GAC always values and cherishes these exchanges, and we look forward to meaningful discussion with the broader ICANN community. One reflection was that I thought it was quite interesting that while we did have some good communication, the depth of that discussion reflected that perhaps it was a long time between drinks for the GAC in some parts of the community. For example, the GAC met with the root server system advisory committee, which I don't think the GAC had met with for quite some time. So a large majority of that exchange was really letting that group remind the GAC about the work of that advisory committee, and outlining the very small number of touch points that the GAC might have with that group. More broadly, the GAC also dealt with quite a number of internal operational issues, including proposed changes to the leadership tenure, as well as the election, which Annalise has already mentioned. So our chair, Nico Caballero from Paraguay, was reappointed by acclamation. I was successful in securing one of the vice chair roles, and I'll be joining with Colombia, the Netherlands, Egypt, and Switzerland, commencing at the end of the next ICANN meeting in Seattle. So we'll go through a bit of a transition process and handover over the next couple of months, and the new leadership will be in place from Seattle onwards. So turning to the communique, so while the GAC did not issue any advice, we did speak about quite a number of issues at length, including DNS abuse, quite a lot of discussion around domain registration data issues, including things like urgent requests of registration data and data accuracy. As usual, we also spent a lot of time talking about the next round of new generic top-level domains, including things like applicant support, auctions, and much like the ALAC Latin script diacritics. We talked a little bit about ICP2, which I'll go into a little bit of detail about in a minute, as well as global internet governance issues like the Global Digital Compact and the upcoming World Summit on Information Society 20-year review. So as I said, I'll spare you most of the details from these discussions. You can have a look at the communique draft to get a sense for specifically what the GAC thinks about these things. If we can, we'll try and send that out via the chat, but if we can't get technology to work for us, we'll make sure it goes out to attendees in due course. So ICP2 was one of the issues that the GAC talked a little bit at length about, and it was it's a document called the Internet Coordination Policy 2, and it outlines the criteria for the creation and potential removal of regional internet registries. So this policy is currently being updated by the address supporting organization, and it's unique because it sits a little bit outside of the usual DNS issues, which the GAC spends most of its time discussing. This is a unique policy which touches on the RIRs, which, as many of you will know, will operate regionally, but comes together globally with touch points to ICANN. In the communique, the GAC specifically calls out this process, makes mention of the fact that there are African GAC members working together to provide input, and as well as talks briefly about some of those regional challenges as well. Like I said, this is a bit of a new space for the GAC, and it is heartening to see the GAC pay attention to challenges which may threaten the broader internet governance landscape, which may be a little bit new to them. So this is something the GAC could be watching over the next year or two, and we can expect to get a little bit more traction through future communique draftings. Australia also chairs two sub-GAC groupings, including the Commonwealth GAC group and the Asia Pacific GAC group. We held meetings in the margins of the ICANN core agenda, and I wanted to make specific mention of the Commonwealth one because we saw a couple of members of parliament from the African region in attendance. This is quite unique. We don't typically see the political layer of governments attend ICANN outside of the high-level government meeting. So this for us was quite an interesting flag to see at least governments in the African region seeing ICANN as being quite an important venue to address government issues. So I guess in summary, I think the GAC continued to pay attention to a breadth of the same public interest issues as they have for the last little while, but it does seem like there's a market adjustment in some of the tenure as the community approaches the next round of new GTLDs. We certainly saw a lot more interest in some of the GAC sessions, and I think certainly the number of GAC bilaterals was a good reflection of this increased interest in as the community approaches the next round of GTLDs. I was a little disappointed that the GAC couldn't spend a little bit more time interfacing with the community. We weren't able to get to the community forum where I know the topic of time zone challenges came up by members from our region. But instead we chose to focus on the communique draft. So this is something that I want to address a little bit more proactively through my vice chair position to make sure that the GAC continues to stay abreast of community sentiment as we approach the next round. While the communique is quite a vitally important part of the way the GAC operates, we shouldn't forget that we are a core part of the multi-stakeholder community and try not to hold ourselves too far removed. Here's hoping we can do better in Seattle. Thanks, Annalise.
Thank you, Ian. And I'm pleased to hear that you will be making an effort regarding GAC engagement with the rest of the community. Governments are a critical part of the multi-stakeholder community. I think especially for the community forums and the public forums, it would be great if they could be there to hear from other parts of the community as well. Before I go to our next speaker, it occurred to me that while I introduced all the speakers, I neglected to introduce myself. So my apologies for that. I came home from Istanbul with the gift of COVID, and I think my brain is still recovering. So my apologies. If you don't know me, I'm Annalise Williams. I'm part of the Internet Governance and Policy team here at ALDA. And I'll be giving an update from the CCNSO after all of our other speakers. So I'll pass now to Ram Mohan. Thank you, Ram.
Annalise, thank you, and I hope you get better quickly. Good morning to all of you. I'm the chair of the ICANN Security and Stability Advisory Committee, and we had a really good set of meetings in Istanbul. But I wanted to bring to you really three things from the SSAC's perspective, and then one other thing that also happened at ICANN81, which I think should be part of any readout. So on the three specific things, the first thing that the SSAC did was host several sessions. One was a briefing to the ICANN board, but we also provided briefings to the GNSO Council, to the ALAC, other places. And one of the topics of the briefing was the impact of AI, artificial intelligence, on DNS abuse. Now, of course, we all know that AI is the topic du jour, but the interesting thing is that criminals have already adapted and adopted AI to drive much greater volume and frequency of DNS abuse attacks, in particular phishing attacks. We are now seeing that from the time a domain name is added to a zone file. In other words, from the moment that a domain name starts to work and resolve on the internet, within the next 4 hours, over 100,000 sets of phish messages go out on that domain name. So it's ever more crucial to be cognizant of the fact that you have huge volume starting up. What is AI doing though? What AI is actually doing is, in the past, it used to be that when you got a phish email come into your inbox, most likely, if you were careful, you could find out that it was a phishing email. There would be some misplaced grammar. There would be some words that were just munged a little bit. The graphics perhaps would not be just perfect. The formatting would not be great. So there were several clues that allowed you to distinguish that this was not the real email. And those kinds of clues were actually part of many algorithms, many detection algorithms that were being used to look for whether there was abuse happening that leveraged a domain name, DNS abuse for phishing happening. Now, with the advent of AI, what's happened is that each of those 100,000 emails that is going out is individually crafted and customized and is word perfect. It has nothing out of whack. The graphics are identical to the original sites that they are trying to impersonate. And they really do a very good job of fooling everybody. And that is one of the big things that we are seeing as an advent of the adoption of AI. Our briefing, and we had a briefing to the GAC as well. Our briefing, this is based on research from one of our SSAC members. The end result of our briefing is this: AI by itself has not changed how criminals are using the DNS and using domain names to perpetrate their crimes or to add more abuse. So we're not seeing different types of abuse come through, but we're seeing both the volume of it and the frequency of it really go up quite significantly, and the sophistication of the phishing emails, we're seeing that go out, become far more accurate, far better, and far better at fooling people into giving up their credentials, giving up their personal information, etc. So that is one part of the finding. The other part in our briefing to the various communities we said was that there's actually some light at the end of the tunnel. We can see that there are ways to deploy AI to detect these AI-generated phishing emails. So this is kind of good AI to catch bad AI, right? So there are actually ways to do that. There are ways by which AI algorithms can be trained to see when a beautiful email that is a complete phish comes through and to identify the characteristics and the traits of it. So we believe that at least our member, the one member whose research we were sharing inside of the community, he believes, and he's an expert in this area, believes that the threatscape, so to speak, from AI in DNS abuse, the threatscape hasn't increased. In other words, we haven't seen brand new threats come about as a result of AI. But what we are seeing is a significant growth in both the volume and the frequency of really well-crafted phishing messages that go out. What does that mean in terms of implication for the domain industry? There are many areas to explore here. Many of them are obvious, some of them are not so obvious, but there's quite a long ways to go. But it's not all bad news when it comes to AI and DNS abuse. There is some ability to address the problems. The second area that I want to share with you is that the SSAC is currently embarking on work that looks at blocking of the DNS. So DNS blocking. Now, the SSAC had many years ago published a report on DNS blocking and DNS filtering, and we had arrived at some conclusions and recommendations. But in the years that have passed, much has changed, especially in the technology area. There are new players, and there is a lot of dynamism in the DNS blocking environment. The highlights, and we have not published our work yet, we're still working on it. But the reason why we're looking at this topic is because 10 years ago, you used to have this idea that DNS blocking was almost reflexively just bad. Now we're in an era where almost everywhere we have policymakers, even people in civil society, other places believe that DNS blocking is here to stay. And so the SSAC's job here is to actually help those who intend to implement DNS blocking understand the pros and cons, and especially understand that most of the times when a regulator or somebody else resorts to DNS blocking as a measure to respond to some issue, most of the time it is disproportionate, and the collateral harm and the collateral damage that it creates is quite significant. So that's kind of the direction we're going. We don't have a report published. I can't say that that'll be the final results, but that's some of the discussions that we've been having. Briefly then, the last item inside the SSAC is we're also studying the use of open source software in the DNS as well as domain name registration infrastructure. In some parts of the world, this is also being called a software bill of materials. There is increased attention to supply chain and supply chain issues that have to do with software. So we are beginning some work in this area as well. Those are the SSAC highlights. Just another quick blurb. We also at the Istanbul meeting had a soft launch of a new coalition that is being built. It's a coalition for digital inclusion, CODI in short. And this is a coalition that is focused on how language is a key component for digital inclusion and how it is often neglected when there are organizations that go and try to bring the digitally unconnected, connect them on. So that's a start. The intent is to have that coalition for digital inclusion launch formally at the ICANN82 meeting in Seattle. Back to you, Annalise.
Thanks very much for that, Ram. I'll now invite Ashley Heinemann to give her update. Go ahead, Ashley.
Thanks, Annalise. And yes, as noted previously, I am recently termed out as a registrar stakeholder group chair, so I'm just a regular schmo again. So I do appreciate being asked to come here because I don't think anybody else cares about who I am anymore, but happy to share any wisdom I might still have in my brain. So I'm going to speak mostly from the perspective of registrars and a bit as registries, but I must admit I can't speak for the whole GNSO because I don't have as much insight into all the areas covered there. But just to touch on some of the issues that are of great importance, particularly to the registrar stakeholder group, is the need and the desire to better articulate our positions with other parts of the community. And using a great example that Ian brought up, sometimes it's really hard to engage with the GAC because having been the past US GAC representative, I know that oftentimes the GAC doesn't get out of the GAC room. And it's really unfortunate because what the GAC is doing is that they're talking about issues and items that really have a lot of impact on how registries and registrars do their business. So it's really important that we have avenues to have conversations with the GAC and other parts of the community, because oftentimes what we see is that we're in a room, we're arguing over policy, but we're not really understanding the different perspectives. So me and some of my colleagues in the registrar stakeholder group have been really adamant about trying to break down barriers. So we really appreciate having had the opportunity to come speak to the GAC. We had a great session, at least I hope the GAC agrees, where we talked about data accuracy. That's one of the issues that's really been of interest in the community. And we had the opportunity to just kind of walk the GAC through why we have the position we have, which is we think our current data accuracy requirements that have been set forth by ICANN is sufficient. And right now, what we're required to do is to make sure that email addresses and phone numbers are syntactically accurate, meaning they follow the format they're supposed to follow, like it has an @ symbol, that sort of thing. But also that either the phone number or the email works. So we send an email out and we have to get a response back to make sure that it actually works. And there's lots of calls from all kinds of governments, but also other constituencies who would love for us to be checking IDs, that would love for us to be using like an populated address tool. And what I think is often lost on the community is that that might work great in one country. That might work great in 5 countries, but we are required vis-a-vis our contracts to do things on global scale. And there really is not a solution out there that works at a global scale. So I think just finding opportunities where we can talk to the different parts of the community to understand why we do certain things and why we don't do certain things really kind of helps us better understand the real debate. And it's not that we are just lazy or we just don't care about the issue. There's actually reasons and rationale behind what we do and what we don't do. So we also had an outreach session on the same topic, data accuracy, that was open to any interested party. And I think that went really well. In fact, we didn't even talk about the registrar perspective. We asked others to kind of role play and guess what other constituencies' perspective is on data accuracy. And there were no deliverables. It was just an opportunity to talk and understand each other. And I think that was also a really good session. So switching gears away from data accuracy, something else that is really of interest and of importance to at least the contracted party house is a newly released draft ethics policy that the ICANN board developed. And that was in response to some concerns, particularly from the contracted party house, that we often find ourselves in situations where statements of interest, which are intended to be a vehicle by which members of the community articulate who they represent, what groups they're involved in, and is intended to be a level of transparency so you know who you're interacting with, particularly in policy development. Because if you're arguing, different perspectives, you'd like to know who you're arguing with. And sometimes it's not always clear. And a number of people in the GAC and in the contracted party house had concerns that the way things were being handled was not transparent enough, that there were too many loopholes for parties not to articulate who they were representing. And this ethics policy, from at least the contracted party house perspective, was a really good step, because it basically articulates that if you can't say who you are representing, then you can't participate in the policy development process. And why that's important is because transparency is really what makes this organization work, that makes a multi-stakeholder model work. And if you don't have transparency and you have these, vehicles by which that you can kind of game the system in a way that's not fair, that doesn't really do any favors to the model overall. So we're really happy to see this as a development. This is still a draft. People are commenting on it now. But that is something that we find to be really important. So the ICANN board, there is a board seat. It's called board seat 13. And that is the one that is typically intended to be reflective of the contracted party, the registries and the registrars. That seat is being vacated. Becky Burr was that board seat 13 person, and she did a fabulous job, but she's terming out. So we're now going through the process of voting for her replacement. And we've got 6 candidates. It's the most candidates we've ever had. It's going to be crazy trying to find like the one person to fit that slot, because all 6 candidates are great and fabulous. But I will stop there. I could talk at length on some issues that will probably put you to sleep, even though it's morning where you are, it's nighttime where I am, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you, Annalise.
Thanks, Ashley. And really important point you made about the need for sort of cross community engagement and engaging with other constituent groups. I think we are all sometimes guilty of sort of just chatting amongst ourselves. And one thing that has sort of struck me since I've been in the CCNSO, like when I was in the GAC alongside you, and we would have conversations with the GNSO that would go on for a very long time, hearing conversations in the CCNSO about how CCTLDs are handling the same problem in all manner of different ways. I think perhaps some more CC and GNSO engagement could be beneficial as well. We've done a bit on DNS abuse, but I think there is scope for other issues as well. So please, if you have questions, I know there is one in the Q&A pod, pop questions in the pod. I'll give an update from the CCNSO, and then we'll go to audience questions for our speakers. And I have a couple of my own, which I will put to speakers, but I will make way to the audience if they have questions that they'd like to ask first. So the CCNSO had a very busy schedule at ICANN81. The TLD Ops undertook a crisis simulation exercise to explore responses to a hypothetical ransomware attack, not just from a technical perspective, but from management and regulatory and comms perspectives as well. TLD Ops is the sort of the incident response community for and by CCTLDs. I think about 60 participants participated in the tabletop exercise. The idea of these exercises is just that the more you practice, the better you can assess and strengthen your response strategies and things like your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. And the less likely you are to sort of panic in the event that it actually happens. DNS abuse was also on our agenda. It's a high interest topic across the whole ICANN community, and it is very important for the CCNSOs. The DNS Abuse Standing Committee presented the results of its 2nd survey, which was just exploring member experiences with DNS abuse. All CCTLDs were invited to respond, and this year I think there were about 56 responses, which is about the same as when they did it the first time in 2022. I think there were 57 that time. And these 56 or 57 represent about 100 CCTLDs because some respondents operate more than one CCTLD. The 10 largest CCs were included in the survey results, so the responses did represent a significant number of domain names, and comparing the results of the survey of the 2022 survey to the 2024 survey, it seems there's been an increase in awareness of DNS abuse amongst CC managers. In the first survey, when they were asked how much abuse was in their CCTLD, 35% of respondents said they didn't know, and that number had reduced in the most recent survey to 21%. The results also showed that CCs have a very low incidence of DNS abuse, and the figure is decreasing. The results are self-reported, but I think they are still significant, and I would encourage you to have a look at the survey results on the website. CCNSO also has a board election. There's a seat vacant that is appointed by the CCNSO, and there are currently 2 candidates to fill it, so there will be an election. Byron Holland, the CEO of CIRA, the Canadian CC Registry, and Nick Wenban-Smith, the General Counsel at Nominet, are both well known in the CCNSO and the broader ICANN community, and both excellent candidates. And there was also quite a lot of committee work going on as well this meeting. I will report just on the ones that outer staff are focused on, but there are a number of other CCNSO committees as well. The Internet Governance Liaison Committee held a working session, which was a crowdsourcing identification of hot topics in internet policy from across the various regions. We do that every year to track issues and see where there are similarities and differences across the various regions and see how priorities are sort of changing over time. The second session was aimed at encouraging CCTLD managers to think about how they might engage in the 20-year review of the World Summit on the Information Society next year. Excuse me. The Strategic and Operational Planning Committee was also very busy. They confirmed their working methods for the creation of input to the to ICANN's new strategic plan, scrutinised the plans and outcomes of the financial year 24 and 25 annual operating plan and budgets. They considered the PTI's strategic plan, and they helped to prepare answers to ICANN board's questions regarding the CCNSO's views on how to respond to ICANN's current financial stress, sorry. They also elected their chair and vice chair, and the same officers were returned. So that's representatives from .de and .ru respectively. And also the Policy Gaps Analysis Working Group presented its first output, which is an overview document of the various policies, procedures and guidance that makes up the framework for how IANA deals with CCTLDs. They also reported on progress to date in their triaging of the list of issues that IANA had shared, and they'll complete that triage by ICANN82 and make a recommendation about which, if any, issues should be first to be resolved, and as well as a method for resolving them. This working group was established after ICANN80 to explore potential gaps in CCNSO policy. So they focused on global policies relevant to CCTLDs. Their work isn't related in any way to policies about individual CCTLDs. It came about after IANA encountered a problem that there was no precedent for and no policy for. In a nutshell, an entity that was listed as the manager for a CCTLD in the IANA delegation records advised that it no longer wanted to be the manager. So sort of looking at those sorts of issues and establishing a sort of an overview of all of the existing policies and guidance that hadn't been documented in one place before. And just briefly, not related to the ICANN meeting itself, but in the margins of ICANN, the day before ICANN started, the Technical Community Coalition for Multi-Stakeholderism held a member event to begin collaborating on how we might engage in the WSIS process next year. The TCCM is a coalition of technical operators from across the globe who sort of advocate for strengthening multi-stakeholder governance and maintaining an open, free, secure, globally interoperable internet. The TCCM was co-founded by AUDA and our CCTLD registry counterparts in Canada, New Zealand and the UK, out of concerns that perhaps the technical community wasn't paying close enough attention to some critical United Nations processes that could change the multi-stakeholder nature of internet governance. So the TCCM launched this year. There are now 26 members from across the globe, and all regions are now represented, and we're still growing. So you can read more about the coalition at our new website, which is tccm.global. I think that's enough from me. I will move to the Q&A pod and see. I saw a question come in before, which has been answered in the chat. And there is another one that I'll just have a look. It says, I think this one might be directed to you, Ram. It says, great to hear about inclusion of Latin script diacritics. I wonder what discussions have been around if this will increase the surface area for DNS abuse. Easy to fool people. For CCTLDs, will such script be for France, Spain, Italy, or English-speaking countries as well? What does this mean for other language scripts? So I think the question is basically, will this lead to increased DNS abuse or easier DNS abuse? And for CCTLDs, will scripts be in other languages as well? So Ram, I might, I'll just on the CCTLD one, just briefly note that policies for CCTLDs and whether different scripts are available and registration policies in general are all a matter for each individual CCTLD. So there'll be different policies are set by the individual CCTLD, so there'll be different answers for different CCs. But Ram, I might invite you to address the question about DNS abuse. And I think, Justine, did you want to address this question as well? Or?
Thanks, Annalise. Just briefly, the case that we're making inside the SSAC, at least one of our members is making, is that the advancement of generative AI is going to mean that the fish emails that come to you are going to be customized for you. It'll include any local language that you have, and it'll present it absolutely almost perfectly. And so it's not just that you don't need a human anymore to write these fish emails, and it can be done in any language in the world. So I don't think that increases the surface area for DNS abuse. What it does do is it increases the volume and the frequency by which it can happen. It just makes it easier for them to use a technique that is already in use right now.
Thanks, Ram. Justine, I saw your hand up a moment ago. Did you want to elaborate on something or ask a question of your own?
Sure. I completely agree with what Ram said in terms of potential for increased DNS abuse, but I just wanted to clarify in terms of the Latin script diacritics. The issue actually is not about introducing Latin diacritics. You can already apply for strings with diacritics in them, right? The issue specifically points to something, and the classic example is Quebec with a diacritic and Quebec without a diacritic. So the issue is that the registry operator for Quebec without a diacritic wants to apply for the string Quebec with a diacritic. And because of the way that something called the root zone label generation rules, which is where all the scripts of the different languages melt together to determine what is a variant and what is not a variant, right? Anyway, in short, it just says that basically Quebec with a diacritic and Quebec without a diacritic are not equivalent of each other. So they're not variants, they're not equivalent of each other. And as the rules for the GTLD program pans out, there could be a problem with the existing registry operator of .Quebec without the diacritic applying and getting the .Quebec string with a diacritic. So the issue that we're talking about, Latin diacritics, is to solve that particular issue, possibly allowing the same registry operator that holds a current TLD, top level domain name, with or without diacritic, to also get the same string with or without the diacritic, depending on how it pans out, And it's a narrow kind of issue to solve really, and may not be an existing TLD operator. It could be also someone who wants to apply for a string with and without, or two strings with or without the diacritic, but they are in fact equivalent to each other in the global scheme of things. Thanks.
Thanks, Justine. That's interesting, and that is not something that I had had been on my radar. So I will dig into that issue. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Do we have any other questions for our speakers? And I would also invite any of our speakers to ask questions of each other as well.
So this is Ram. This is for Ashley. Ashley, you heard talk of who the CCNSO voting candidates are. Do you want to take a minute and just list out who is running for the board seat from the GNSO side?
Sure. So we have on the registrar side 3 candidates. First being James Bladell from GoDaddy. I vote for him, my boss. Also, we have Greg DiBiase from Amazon Registrar, and we have Reg Levy from Tucows. On the registry side, we have Keith Drazik from VeriSign. We have oh my gosh, I'm going to forget everybody's. Oh, Jonathan Robinson, who I believe is somehow, you'll have to correct me on this, but Identity Digital, but I think he might be more of in a consultant capacity. And then we have Edmund Chung from .asia. So what is also happening though is that we've totally revised our voting process as well. So hopefully this won't be an instance where things go completely awry because we were introduced to new processes into the mix, but it should be good.
Sorry, I was muted. Ram, I've got a question for you, and then Ian, I see your hand up, so I'll go to you next. Ram, you mentioned in your update the report on DNS blocking, which hasn't been published yet. What's the time frame on that one? When might we sort of expect to see it?
Thanks, Annalise. We're aiming to, if we can arrive at consensus, perhaps by the ICANN82 meeting in Seattle, if not the ICANN83 meeting in Prague. So that's kind of what we're targeting. But as with these things, you get deep into the document and then something comes up and it might take a little longer. But that's kind of what we're targeting.
Thanks, Ram. And Ian, see your hand, go ahead.
Thanks, Annalise. And I didn't know you were going to ask Ram a question because my question's for Ram as well. You talked a lot here, and as well as at the meeting, about AI and its impacts. There's a lot of discussion about the harms or the negative attributes that AI can bring to our system. Did you have any thoughts on how it might be a force for good within our space that you might be able to elaborate on a little bit?
Thanks, Ian. Great question. And in fact, we're working with some organizations that are leveraging AI as a force for good. And the primary areas have to do with the incredible power that comes from the large language model capability of the new generative AI systems. So we have some established cases where some of these models are looking at large quantities of spam and fish, and are able to pre-classify and very quickly identify possible sources of spam and fish very quickly. And there are some registries, some CCTLD registries, in fact, that have employed some level of machine learning to do some kind of predictive analysis of where the next fraudulent registration might come from, and then in some cases proactively work to either monitor them or take them down. So we're seeing some early cases of it. Of course, as with all of these things, Ian, the criminals move much faster because they don't mind if they break something. And on our side, we have to be, it's very much a measure twice and cut once approach.
Thanks, Ram. Ian, your hand's still up. Is that an old hand? Yeah, did you have a follow-up? No? All right, we'll go to Ashley, and then I think that might be all we have time for, but go ahead, Ashley.
And it's not a new question. I just wanted to kind of add on to what Ram said, in that AI is proving to be a tool. We're all kind of learning how to grow with it and use it. But one thing, particularly at this stage right now, is that it's something we can't rely on completely. Like there always needs to be kind of like the backup human eyeball on things. So there's a tendency to be like, oh, we got AI, this is going to fix everything. And we're definitely not at that state yet. So I just want to make sure that was clear. Thanks.
Thanks, Ashley. And that brings us almost to the end. So I guess I'll give an opportunity for any of our speakers to ask one final question or make a comment before we close. No? Well, thank you all for joining us. Ashley, Ian, Ram and Justine, it's been a pleasure to have you here. And particularly Ram and Ashley, we appreciate you being up in the night for our update. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, everybody. And thank you particularly to our speakers. We will call this one to a close. Thanks,
Annalise. Get better.
Thanks, Ram.
Thank you.